Hi, welcome. My name is Dale McCluskey. And on this video, I'd like to talk about the basic test to assess whether or not a dog is actually starting to gain power within the relationship, and the type of clues which are going to allow you to see things more clearly, and then seek out a intervention which is going to allow you to come into right relationship with your dog. One of the basic tests, which goes beyond just appearances, is how it's defined within the context of reasonable influence, and this whole issue about what's reasonable really aligns with this whole idea or concept of leadership. And so, of course, on the spectrum of influence, and this is where, if you look at my relational model and how influence is defined within the framework of creating meaningful change, one of the intersecting points, one of the real main distinctions is the difference between corrective and relational influence. And so, instead of waiting for kind of what we interpret as bad behavior to happen and then responding to it, within this model takes a proactive approach to creating change, because again, stepping back and looking at the relationship and getting somewhat of a three-dimensional view, we already know that we have to move from point A to point B in the relationship, and then the question is posed, how do we do that? I mean, how do we move from point A to point B in the relationship, making sure that we're able to influence unwanted behavior. And so one of the tests, one of the main tests, if you want to assess and see where you're kind of standing within that kind of range of the roles and defining how they kind of line up, is the same thing that goes within when people start to struggle with behavior issues with their dog. One of the first things to go is the leash walk, is actually walking the dog on the leash within the framework of leadership, and that that doesn't represent the dog walking you, but bringing it within what's referred to as the heel position, which is beside you on the leash. So, but one of the tests is to actually take your dog out onto the street using not a retractable leash, but just a short leash, and start to bring them under reasonable influence. Start to promote leadership, not using commands, and that's important. Because again, what I show is dogs, because they share a very deep connection with us in the relational beings, they actually know the intent. They actually sense where we're going, even beyond body language. They actually can they get a really good sense through this connection of the movement of how your mind shifts. Okay, so as you start shifting that way, they're going to respond. The mind's going to react. But again, when you're out on the walk on the leash, by bringing your dog into the sit position, by just bringing them into it, modeling them into it, using your hands, tips of your fingers. Now, when you do that, you're not doing it aggressively. Okay, you're just again, it's about reasonable influence. So you're doing it smooth, fluid technique, but you're definitely bringing them into the position, and because again, they know the intent. So this whole idea, concept of learning, gets kind of twisted up in all this, because we think, okay, well, the dog isn't doing it because they don't understand, what we want. When in reality, they fully understand, the picture that we're painting. Okay, they understand fully the intent and where we want them to go. It's just that we're bringing it directly through nature now. Okay, we're aligning through strength and weakness through nature, and so that's going to represent, how we're perceived within that context. So when you see a dog really flare up and challenge at a certain level, that'll give you a good indicator. But it's not just that too. This is the whole thing about dogs and how their decision-making process, how it all branches off. by stepping back and looking at the actual how a dog's mind responds within the framework of the relationship itself, you're going to see, again, behavioral clues. It's all going to connect. However, this is an important point, because of the script and how we're perceived within the context of the relationship, we're not going to have good clarity as to this whole, this is where emotions really play a big role here. We're not going to have good clarity because, we're mirroring our emotions. The dog is going to be overly seeing us as property, overly possessive of us. So we're not going to see a big problem within that kind of direct interaction. Now, depending on the levels, we might. The dogs will become overly possessive and start to grab a hold of and really act out. But because we're being objectified, okay, and we see the dog as loving us and that possessive, I call it a reverse type of fulfillment going on, we're not going to get good clarity. We're going to see, other things take shape, and that's where, again, what can happen is we can actually end up, building a world for the dog to fit into, which sets up this whole level of control as opposed to change. Okay, and that's important, and that's another important point to consider as you're thinking about it. But again, getting back to the whole basic task is how the dog responds, within the kind of framework of the relationship itself with reasonable influence. Okay, of course, it's the whole thing with psychology. Once you get a certain point of emotion, nothing's reasonable. People argue and go on, and that's where this whole cycle starts. And it's like a cycle of failure. So again, I would just encourage you to really step back in the relationship. When the dog is, when they're starting to challenge and reject being brought under influence within the framework of leadership, you're going to, you're going to start to see that perhaps you need help, you need some sort of an intervention. And I really would encourage you to look at the whole context of leadership and how I show that training really is an intervention. And then when you look at again, going back to this whole thing about defining the intersecting points of the differences between my relational model, this approach, and others, is there's some main differences right out of the starting gate. And the whole focus here within the system is to make sure relational change is going to happen. I mean, that's important. So nothing contaminates that. Things that aren't helpful aren't going to interfere in that process. So, it's because of what I show. It's all about how people think. It's all about how you connect, how you think about your dog through that connection. And so, because dogs are able to get a very clear picture of your personality type, of how you're thinking, how you're connecting, and so that really matters. That plays a critical role. And so it's all psychology. It really is. It's all about how you approach training right out of the starting gate. And so if you approach it, which takes it further away from that intervention pivot point, you're setting yourself up to be deceived through, can't talk a lot about why the whole physical response script and how that can be disconnected from actual relational change happening. So again, encourage you to check out my website. Lots of good information, lots of training options available for people. And again, thanks very much for watching.